Many of you have likely noticed that countries across Asia are becoming increasingly popular destinations for LGBTQ people. Of course, this is not too surprising, considering that it is a continent full of diverse and exciting places that many of us dream of visiting. And by the end of today's video, you will know exactly which countries in Asia are objectively and statistically the absolute best for LGBTQ people in 2025. Now, some may remember that last year, I made a video that covered the safest countries in Asia for LGBTQ people. And in that video, I opted to create a list based off of two factors. One being queer rights as measured by Equaldex, and the other being general safety according to the Global Peace Index from the Institute of Economics and Peace. One critique that some had of this criteria was that they did not care about general safety nearly as much as about LGBTQ rights, public opinion, and societal acceptance. This perspective is something I totally understand, as countries like Mongolia scored higher than countries like Thailand in last year's list due to general safety being a factor in overall scores. And so, this year, I decided to create a fresh list based solely on LGBTQ-specific metrics. Each country's score for queer rights is measured by Equaldex, and the score they achieve on the highly respected Global Acceptance Index from UCLA's Williams Institute of Law will both be combined and averaged out to establish the final rankings. However, despite ditching the general safety metric, I will still add a small star emoji next to countries that are especially safe for those who are still interested, even though it won't factor into the final score. But now, without any further delay, let's jump right in. Our journey today begins in Southeast Asia with the rapidly evolving and dynamic country of Vietnam. Now, here's a fun fact that I bet only a small percent of you watching today will know. It is believed that in Vietnam, homosexuality has never been punished under law. This is largely due to the fact that being queer was not taboo in indigenous religions throughout Vietnam's history, nor in Buddhism. Additionally, homosexuality has been legal in France since 1791, so even during the period of French colonial rule, no anti-gay or trans laws were put in place. Unfortunately, Vietnam still has not achieved marriage equality or civil unions, but activists are working hard to change this, and following Thailand's introduction of marriage equality earlier this year, there is an added hope that Vietnam may soon follow. Ever since 2008, gender-affirming care has been relatively accessible throughout the country, but legally changing one's gender requires a sex reassignment surgery, and even this has only been possible since 2017. To this day, non-binary people still have no legal recognition in Vietnam, and the country also does not yet have any anti-discrimination legislation in place, so this is yet another area in which future progress is needed, and clearly more work remains to be done on the legislative front. But on a positive note, ever since 2022, conversion therapy has been fully banned, making Vietnam one of the first countries on Earth to implement such a ban, even ahead of countries like Norway and Switzerland. A 2023 poll from the Pew Research Center found that 65% of Vietnamese people were in favor of marriage equality, with just 30% opposed. Also, a Gallup poll from the same year found that 67% of respondents in the country believed that Vietnam was a good place for LGBTQ people to live. Overall, in terms of both legislation and public opinion, Vietnam performs quite decently with a score of 50 from Equaldex. Not incredible, but also not bad either. On the subject of LGBTQ acceptance in broader Vietnamese society, the Global Acceptance Index gives the country a score of 4.99, higher than many European countries like Latvia, Slovakia, and Romania, just for some added context. With a booming economy, forward-looking society, and a hunger for success, this country of 101 million is emerging as one of Asia's next big destinations, especially for queer travelers. Its delicious food and rich cultural heritage makes Vietnam a truly special place, and due to its quite open attitude to queer rights and its general acceptance of our community, it is not hard to see how it manages to earn an overall score of 50, and in doing so, secures the rank of 8th best Asian country for LGBTQ people in 2025. Staying in Southeast Asia, we now head to Singapore, a country that has gone from being truly terrible for our community to 7th best at lightning speed. For example, Singapore only decriminalized homosexuality in January of 2023, and before that, gay men could be sentenced to 2 years in prison for being in a same-sex relationship. But despite this horrible law being in place until very recently, a 2024 poll from Ipsos found that 54% of respondents in the country now support marriage equality, and only 25% of people are opposed to it. Additionally, despite the fact that gender-affirming care is still restricted for minors in Singapore, another Ipsos poll from early 2024 found that an overwhelming majority of Singaporeans support gender-affirming care for trans teens. Ever since 1973, trans adults have been able to change their legal gender in the country, but only after undergoing sex reassignment surgery. And still in 2025, Singapore does not legally recognize non-binary people. But a 2023 poll showed that people in Singapore were largely in favor of gender-neutral options on documentation. Yet another example of how public opinion remains ahead of legislation in the country. Ever since 2019, Singapore has codified some anti-discrimination protections for LGBTQ people, but it is not clear if these extend to areas such as employment and housing. Furthermore, Singapore has yet to repeal its 1989 censorship law that targets both gay bars and LGBTQ subjects being covered in the media and schools. But still, despite these very real and ongoing legal shortcomings, Singapore has taken important steps in recent years to become a far more open, safe, and accepting place for our community. And the incredibly encouraging public opinion polls we have seen coming out of the country, especially in the past few years since homosexuality was decriminalized, seem to indicate that future legislative wins are also on the horizon. Speaking of which, the Global Acceptance Index from UCLA's Williams Institute of Law gives Singapore an impressive score of 5.86, slightly higher than countries like Greece, Estonia, and Cyprus. Considering that just a few years ago it was a crime to be gay in Singapore, the fact the country is now the 7th objectively most LGBTQ-friendly country in Asia is even more impressive. Singapore is already well known for its wealth, architecture, high standard of living, and equally high cost of living, but it also should be recognized as a nation in transition. Ranking 7th in Asia for LGBTQ people is already a notable achievement, and with continued movement in the right direction, there is much to look forward to. Naturally, the future remains uncertain, but the positive public sentiment towards our community and recent legal wins together make it a safe bet that this influential Southeast Asian country is only just beginning its journey forward. We now head roughly 3,000 kilometers to the northeast, where we find the 6th most LGBTQ-friendly Asian country in 2025. In Japan, being gay has been legal since 1881, and before that, it was only illegal for 8 years, likely to impress Western nations with whom Japan were increasingly in contact with. But apart from these 8 years, being gay in Japan has been legal for nearly all of the country's history. Sadly, like Singapore, Japan also does not yet have marriage equality, despite public opinion largely favoring it, with a 2024 poll from Ipsos finding that 67% of Japanese respondents explicitly support marriage equality and only 6% are against it. Interestingly, this is a far better result than public opinion polls in almost every Western country. Since 2019 alone, 6 different district courts have ruled that Japan is breaching parts of its own constitution by not allowing for same-sex marriage. Some possible reasons why the government has not yet followed through on the court rulings span from the current conservative LDP party in power to the traditional Koseki family registry system. But truly, this could be a subject of its own, and I don't want to oversimplify it. Still, the ongoing court rulings in conjunction with the extremely high levels of public support mean that Japan will almost certainly achieve marriage equality in the very near future, but the exact date is impossible to predict. Perhaps the most important thing to note about the situation for LGBTQ rights in Japan is the fact that almost all of its laws trail general sentiment in society by a massive margin. For example, gender-affirming care is restricted for minors, changing one's legal gender requires sterilization, and anti-discrimination protections exist but are not robust. However, if it were up to the Japanese public, gender-affirming care would be accessible to teens, anti-discrimination laws would be far more comprehensive, and non-binary people would be able to select gender-neutral options on their documentation. So, hopefully in the near future, Japan's laws can catch up to its largely LGBTQ-friendly society. According to the Global Acceptance Index, Japan receives a score of 5.26, highlighting its openness to our community despite the country's legislative stagnation. People love to say that Japan is living in the year 2050, but I would say it is more accurate that Japan is living in 1650, 1990, and 2050 all at the same time. But one thing is certain. This ancient, futuristic, traditional, progressive country known as Japan has earned the rank of 6th best Asian country for LGBTQ people in 2025, and, with just a handful of legal changes, could one day find itself near to the very top of the list. The next stop on our journey brings us to South Asia, where we find a country that may surprise many of you. India only decriminalized homosexuality 6 years ago, but by 2023 had already come exceptionally close to achieving marriage equality, something activists are still hopeful will happen in the near future. For now, though, queer couples in the country do have the right to unregistered cohabitation with certain government protections, but this falls short of even being a proper civil union. The situation for trans rights in India is better, but still not perfect. Since 2019, gender-affirming care has been legal and widely accessible in the country, which is a huge win, and in 2014, India decided to offer legal recognition for non-binary and gender-diverse individuals. The Hijra gender in India has long existed outside of the male-female binary, and so allowing for gender-neutral documentation is based in thousands of years of precedent. Unfortunately, for male-to-female and female-to-male trans people, sex reassignment surgery is required before one can legally change their gender, so more progress is definitely needed, as bottom surgery can be dangerous, costly, and is not something every trans person desires, as it is a very personal choice. Currently, anti-discrimination laws in the country only protect people based off of their gender identity, but not sexual orientation. Queer people are still banned from serving in the military, and only one Indian state has banned conversion therapy, but hopefully this number will be expanding in the near future. Support for our community is noticeably lower in India than previous countries we have covered, but a majority of people do still support marriage equality. And, in a 2017 joint poll from Ipsos and the Williams Institute of Law, an overwhelming 71% of respondents answered yes when asked if trans people are a natural occurrence. Overall, then, it is evident that in terms of both LGBTQ rights and public opinion, India ranks above average both regionally and globally, with its laws slightly better than the reported levels of support in Indian society. I will note that after looking through more than 30 reputable polls taken throughout India, it is clear that trans and non-binary people are generally viewed far more favorably than gay, lesbian, bi, or ace individuals, so that is worth keeping in mind. Also, according to the Global Acceptance Index, India receives a score of 5.28 in societal acceptance for LGBTQ people, placing India in the top 25% of countries globally. Overall, then, we see that India outperforms most of Asia in terms of legislation, particularly in areas around trans rights, and even though public opinion is lower than ideal, the country still secures the rank of 5th most LGBTQ-friendly Asian country in 2025, beating Japan by 1.5 points. India is a massively diverse country of nearly 1.5 billion, and while much work certainly remains, it's abundantly clear that LGBTQ people in this dynamic country won't stop until true equality has been achieved. Moving now to the very eastern edge of Southeast Asia, we eventually arrive in the Philippines. Ever since gaining independence, homosexuality has been legal in nearly all of the country, other than the Muslim-majority city of Marawi. To this day, the country has yet to achieve marriage equality, or even civil unions, but many different proposals to recognize queer relationships have been put forward in recent years, and could one day soon lead to a tangible legal victory. Ever since 1992, gender-affirming care has been completely legal and unrestricted in the Philippines. But, to this day, the country does not allow for trans or non-binary individuals to change their legal gender on official documents. Some anti-discrimination laws do exist in the Philippines, but they are often not enforced, and only sexual orientation is covered by the country's laws against housing discrimination. In terms of public opinion, in 2022, 82.17% of those polled in a World Values Survey said they would accept a homosexual neighbor, 10 points higher than when the same question was asked back in 2014. Interestingly, a 2016 poll in the country found that slightly more people in the Philippines supported trans men than trans women, but both were more accepted than not, though by a small margin. This poll is nearly 10 years old, however, and I would bet support has increased substantially since then. In 2023, a Gallup survey found that 65% of respondents in the Philippines believed their local area was a good place for gay and lesbian people to live, which was nearly 25 percentage points higher than the average response rate in the 124 countries that took part in this particular study. All things considered, the Philippines earns a score of 56 from Equaldex, with public opinion ever so slightly above the legal situation. The Global Acceptance Index has given the country 6.06 points for societal acceptance of LGBTQ people, which happens to be the highest yet out of any country we have covered so far. This in turn means that the Philippines beats India by 2.5 points and Japan by 3.5 points, as it secures the rank of 4th most LGBTQ-friendly Asian country in 2025. It is undeniable that the Catholic Church and Christians more broadly have a strong and oppressive presence throughout the Philippines, and, along with the Muslim-majority areas in the south of the country, are fighting as hard as they can to hold the Philippines back and deny our people basic human rights. But the queer community of the Philippines is rising above this and making steady progress to break down systems of oppression and secure an open and equal future. As the 4th best country in Asia for our community, the Philippines has already come such a long way, and with some future legal improvements in the area of marriage equality, trans rights, and beefed up anti-discrimination laws, the future for this incredible country will be a bright one. Heading directly north now across the Luzon Strait, we come to a country that happens to be one of my personal favorites on Earth. Taiwan has become famous in recent years as one of Asia's most progressive, high-tech, and prosperous nations, all of which I can confirm as quite accurate labels as someone who has spent quite a good amount of time in the country. Ever since at least 1947, homosexuality has been legal in Taiwan, and traditionally LGBTQ people were also largely accepted in indigenous Taiwanese culture. In 2019, Taiwan became the first country in Asia to achieve marriage equality, a powerful example that other Asian countries have started to follow in recent years. Trans rights in Taiwan still have room for improvement as gender-affirming care is legal and accessible, but trans people must first undergo surgery before changing their legal gender, and non-binary people are still unable to get accurate documentation. Since 2007, Taiwan has had protections from employment discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity, but currently there are no laws protecting for housing discrimination. Impressively though, back in 2018, Taiwan became the 3rd country in the world to pass a full ban on conversion therapy, behind only Malta and Ecuador. It is important to note, however, that the legislative situation in the country is substantially ahead of public opinion. For example, the score Taiwan receives for its LGBTQ laws is quite high, but its score for public opinion is one of the lowest on this list. A 2023 poll from Pew found that only a very slim majority of respondents supported marriage equality, despite it being the law for more than 4 years at the time of the survey. Likewise, the Global Acceptance Index gives Taiwan a score of 5.74, marginally higher than Japan, India, and Vietnam, but lower than Singapore and the Philippines. Still, despite its less than perfect public opinion reports, Taiwan manages to soundly secure the rank of 3rd most LGBTQ-friendly Asian country in 2025, driven largely by its laws that are currently some of, if not the most progressive in all of Asia. As the first on the continent to achieve marriage equality, Taiwan definitely has a special place in queer history. No country is perfect, but Taiwan's general safety, solid laws, rich culture, and incredible food make it one of my favorite countries in the world, and one that I believe every queer person should definitely have on their radar. Now, before we finish with the two most LGBTQ friendly countries in all of Asia, I want to ask you personally to become a citizen of the Queer Kingdom. Your help fighting for our future and building a strong, informed community is vital in our quest of making the world a safer place for our people. You can officially join the Kingdom here on YouTube for $1 a month, which will help me make this channel my full-time focus as soon as possible. The more time I can spend on content creation, the better I can serve the community. You will also get access to some cute custom queer emojis and crown icons next to your comments on this channel that change and evolve the longer you are a member. Also, monthly live streams are always public, but they are moved to the members-only feed afterwards. Controversial videos covering heavy subjects that are not quite YouTube friendly are also privately posted for citizens of the Kingdom so that we can all stay informed. And, finally, joining the Queer Kingdom here on YouTube gives you the ability to chat with me and fellow members through access to our Queer Kingdom members Discord. I look forward to meeting you and working with you to create a safe and prosperous world for our people, one step at a time. Also, if you are planning a trip overseas and would like guidance in crafting the perfect and safest trip, please reach out to my email queerkingdomtravel@gmail.com. We can then set up a phone call or continue by email as we plan a trip that is both exciting and aligns with your core values. All who are interested can find more information in the description or can contact me directly using the email on screen. And now for the runner-up, a country that I guess 90% of you would have expected to secure the top spot, but this year has come in second. The queer icon also known as Thailand. Now, I believe it's safe to say that when people think of LGBTQ-friendly Asian countries, Thailand is usually the first or second country that comes to mind, behind only Taiwan perhaps. And this is for a lot of good reasons. I mean, in all of the many thousands of years of Thai history, homosexuality was only ever illegal for 54 years between 1903 and 1957, a far better record than the vast majority of countries in the world. Speaking of which, at the start of this year, Thailand became the second country in Asia to achieve marriage equality, and the first in Southeast Asia. This huge milestone will hopefully inspire neighboring countries to do the same. But while Thailand has certainly made history for this, the situation in the country for trans rights is more of a mixed bag, as all gender-affirming care is accessible and HRT is free in the public Thai healthcare system, but it is still impossible for trans and non-binary people to obtain accurate legal documentation. In fact, the situation for trans people in the country is quite nuanced, and so, just about a week ago, I made a video specifically diving into the topic of trans rights in Thailand, so if you want a deeper look, feel free to check that out. But for now, I will just add that while some key pieces of trans-specific legislation are still lacking in Thailand, public opinion towards the community is exceptionally good, and the country has some of the highest support on Earth for trans athletes, education, and gender-diverse individuals. So, while the laws need some serious attention, society remains quite open compared to the vast majority of the world. In terms of anti-discrimination laws, Thailand also falls short of comprehensive protection, particularly in the area of employment. Altogether, Thailand earns an impressive 69 points from Equaldex in terms of LGBTQ rights, with its score for public opinion being nearly identical. This places the country even ahead of the UK, USA, and Greece overall. Likewise, the Global Acceptance Index similarly gives Thailand a score of 5.81. Between the country's above-average legal situation, exceptionally high public opinion, and largely satisfactory levels of inclusion in society, Thailand secures the title of second most LGBTQ-friendly Asian country in 2025, with a substantial 5.5 lead over Taiwan. It is also important to highlight that no country is perfect, and that it would be a vast oversimplification to say that Thailand is a queer utopia. But one thing that is certain is the fact that this Southeast Asian country is truly one of the most open, tolerant, and forward-looking countries in the world. Yes, there are several important legal wins that are still needed in Thailand, but it is already a country that every LGBTQ person should have on their radar, as it really is leading the region into a more free and open future. And now, we at last arrive in the country that is currently the statistically most LGBTQ-friendly in Asia. I imagine that Nepal is likely not a country that many of us would have guessed to be at the top of today's list, but when we dig into the details, it starts to make more sense. After centuries of oppression under colonial rule, Nepal officially went back to its roots of LGBTQ acceptance in 2007, when it decriminalized homosexuality and transness. Then, just last year, Nepal began to recognize some same-sex relationships, but with immense ambiguity and caveats that have left the situation unclear as to whether or not it has truly achieved marriage equality. I actually made a short video explaining this in more detail and addressing the various reasons why Nepal likely still needs further legislation before it can be considered as having truly reached this pivotal milestone in human rights and liberty. Still, the steps the country has already taken to recognize queer relationships are an important start. In terms of trans rights, Nepal is basically the opposite of most countries we have so far covered, as trans and non-binary people are able to amend their documents and are fully recognized by the government ever since 2024. But gender-affirming care is restricted and not accessible within the country, and thus must be obtained abroad in most recorded cases. Like in many South and Southeast Asian countries, Nepal has an ancient and deep cultural understanding of gender diversity, and while this was altered during colonization, the country has begun to reclaim this crucial part of its culture and history. Currently, discrimination against, quote, sexual minorities is illegal under Nepalese law, but it is unclear if this includes gender identity in practice, and it's unlikely these protections extend to employment and housing, so further legislation is necessary. But the area in which Nepal truly shines above the rest, and the reason why it has secured the title of most LGBTQ-friendly country in Asia, all comes down to public opinion, as Nepal receives a truly spectacular score of 7.84 for societal acceptance. To put this in perspective, this is a higher score than in Germany, France, Brazil, Austria, or Mexico, along with many other countries well known for being quite LGBTQ-friendly. And as such, when both the laws and levels of public support are taken into account, Nepal ends up with an incredibly high score of 75 points, which is 9 points higher than Thailand. This is, once again, driven not only by Nepal's decent laws, but more than anything by its high levels of societal acceptance. Of course, it goes without saying that even in societies that are largely tolerant, discrimination, bigotry, and marginalization still happen. Nepal is absolutely not an exception to this unfortunate reality. But everything in this world is relative to other things, and when compared to most countries, and specifically those in Asia, Nepal truly stands out as a leader in LGBTQ rights and acceptance. Once the government clarifies the situation on marriage equality and makes gender-affirming care more accessible, it's not hard to imagine Nepal eventually turning into a leader in queer rights, not only for Asia, but for the world. Now, before we end with today's queer news story, I thought it may be interesting to some if I briefly share my own ranking based off of many factors that fall outside of the scope of today's verifiable and statistical metrics. Everyone knows I love data, but sometimes it does not show the full story. As such, it may be useful or at least fascinating to compare the list based off of the metrics used in the video to the list that I would have come up with based off of a combination of my travels, extensive research, and talking to people in our community from each country on the list. You will also notice that in my list, South Korea makes an appearance in the 6th spot. No matter which list you go off of, each and every one of these countries are worth the shout-out and are objectively making great strides in fostering ever more inclusive and free societies one step at a time. And now, for today's queer news story, I want to draw urgent attention to a profoundly disturbing development out of Florida, a state that has increasingly become ground zero for legislative attacks on our community, with the latest example being the targeting of Macy Reintgen, a 20-year-old transgender college student from Illinois who was arrested for using a women's restroom in the Florida state capitol. She bravely decided to engage in an act of civil disobedience against Florida's so-called facility requirements based on sex law, which is a grotesque piece of legislation that mandates bathroom use based solely off of sex assigned at birth. Marcy even informed lawmakers before she walked into the bathroom, knowing she might be arrested, but that barbaric and harmful law needed to be challenged anyway, in her opinion. I agree. Upon washing her hands in the bathroom, Reintgen was arrested and charged with second-degree trespassing, misgendered, dead-named by law enforcement, and then was held overnight in a men's jail. a decision that not only endangered her physical safety, but underscores the inhumane treatment that trans people in Florida endure on a daily basis. This wasn't about enforcing the law. This was about sending a message that the Republican-led government of Florida is willing to criminalize identity, weaponize state power, and dehumanize anyone who defies their binary regressive vision of society. The punishment Marcy now faces for washing her hands is up to 11 months in jail. This is not justice. It is a political warning shot to the entire trans community. If this story infuriates you and scares you, good, now do something about it. Share her story, contact Florida lawmakers and demand accountability, support legal defense funds and grassroots organizations fighting for trans rights. 2 of them I will link below, and they are ALCU and the Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund. Also, most importantly, vote out every cowardly legislator pushing this agenda of cruelty. The fight for equality needs more than outrage, it needs action. The links are in the description. Be loud, be relentless, and stand up in whatever ways you can before it is too late. Thank you, friends, for watching today and spending time with me as we seek to spread the word about important topics in the community. For those interested, you are more than welcome to stay around and join our increasingly powerful kingdom here on YouTube as we fight for a future. Until next time, QK out.